Hey everyone, I'm Rick, and this week we're talking about informed consent. And in particular, I'm going to talk about the requirements here in my home state of Ohio. Informed consent in counseling serves as a fundamental ethical and legal process to help protect the client and ensure transparency in the therapeutic relationship. But honestly, as I've gone through this, I can see how it's originally designed to help protect the client, but I can see how a good informed consent helps to protect us, the counselor, as well. Well, here in Ohio, the Ohio Administrative Code lays out specifics for the counselor to keep in mind as they go through informed consent with the client. And it's really a focus on client awareness and client decision making. Clients must be informed about the extent, the nature, and the limitation of counseling services. And they have the right to understand obligations and opportunities before they engage in counseling. Ohio law makes it very clear that a valid informed consent is required and that counseling can only be delivered within the confines of a professional relationship and within the limits of informed consent. Consent must include clarity on cost, on legal limitations, alternatives, and the client's right to cancel counseling at any time. These laws also talk about special consideration that must be given to make sure that the client comprehends what you're talking about in this informed consent, and how you may need to bring in interpreters or provide additional visual aids to make sure that they understand what's being communicated as part of this informed consent. Ohio law also talks about how counselors are required to follow court documents that they may receive unless those documents go against something that's already laid out in Ohio law. Informed consent needs to make sure that the clients are aware of that process, that you're required as a counselor to comply with any court documents that you receive. If counseling may be about a child custody issue, then Ohio law also lays out steps that the counselor needs to go through to make sure that they receive any relevant court documents as it relates to guardianship, shared custody, or visitation before they begin any counseling services. These laws regarding informed consent also talk about clients that are mandated into treatment, and that the counselor needs to go through the client's rights as it relates to this, the nature and the extent of services, and limitations on confidentiality, but also the client's right to refuse these services and any potential consequences that may come from that. In the wake of COVID-19, certainly telehealth and telemedicine is more prevalent than ever. And informed consent takes into consideration any making sure that the counselor communicates to the client any limitations or differences in counseling from telehealth versus in person, such as limitations on privacy or how crisis situations are handled or may be more challenging to handle in a telehealth scenario. When treating couples or families, informed consent also needs to make sure that there is clarity on confidentiality limits in this relationship-based counseling, and also to make sure that they're aware of how you will manage conflicts should, say, the counselor be called into court to testify. These laws also take into consideration multicultural and make it very clear to the counselor that they must communicate informed consent in a culturally appropriate and clear manner, and how they may need to bring in interpretive services to make sure that the client fully is aware before any treatment services are delivered. As this next step, I pulled an informed consent from a random counselor here in Ohio, and I compared it in detail against the requirements of the American Counseling Association's Code of Ethics, as well as the Ohio Administrative Code. All in all, I'll say that it was a Laura Lewis and LPCC here in Ohio. And all in all, I would say they did a really good job of making sure that things were met. It was the language that was used was very clear. It was easy to understand. It talked about the nature of the counseling process. It talked about limitations of liability, of confidentiality. It talked about all those things. It talked about their orientation to counseling and their approach that they take. It even talked about how sometimes, there's no guarantees in the therapeutic process, and sometimes things may get worse before it gets better. I thought those parts of it were really, really good, but there were a few areas that I saw that maybe there were some gaps and some opportunities to make it an even better document. One area in particular was a specific Ohio law as it relates to providing counseling services for minors that are age 14 and over. And it's Ohio Revised Code 5122.04. And in particular, it talks about how minors age 14 and over can receive outpatient mental health services without parental consent, but only for 6 sessions or 30 days, at which point parental consent is required. In this informed consent, there was nothing that covered that at all, and I could see how that could create some potential conflicts or ethical issues if it's not addressed early on. Another area that I saw some opportunities is as it relates to court-ordered treatment and legal compliance. And this specifically is talking about the Ohio Administrative Code 4757-5-02B-6 that requires counselors to obtain relevant court documents before proceeding with treatment in cases involving custody, visitation, or guardianship. And this document doesn't explicitly mention this at all on how it would be handled, which is another one of those important areas that I think could create some ethical issues if it's not addressed and it's clear up front. The other one that I saw was as it relates to duplication of services. In the Ohio Administrative Code, section 4757-0502B states that counselors should avoid duplicating services when a client is receiving treatment somewhere else. And again, this document, it doesn't explicitly address how overlapping treatment with other professionals would be handled. And it's another one of those areas where I think the document could be just a little bit better if it was included. You know, as it relates to informed consent, I think as Christian counselors or future Christian counselors, there's a few other things that we may want to take into consideration as well. And Ford and King do a really good job in Chapter 1, Christian Integration in the Counseling Profession, where they give some good advice on how, as counselors, Christian counselors are describing the nature of counseling. They're describing their theoretical orientation and any specific trainings that they may have received. It becomes a great opportunity to talk about how faith and spirituality and God can be incorporated into the counseling process. And it gives the client an opportunity to make an informed decision that, hey, you know, this guy seems like he really knows his stuff and he's passionate about incorporating God into it. But the client then has the opportunity to look at, is that the right fit for me? Or would I be better off with a more secular-based counselor? It puts them in charge and it gives them that autonomy and that free will to make the best informed decision for them. Man, I hope this was helpful to you guys, and I can't wait to see the videos that you have as well. You guys have a great week.